For thousands of years, humans have been captivated by space. Ancient cultures worshipped lunar and solar deities, with some even building temples to the moon and the sun. The ancient Greeks, Babylonians, Egyptians, and Vikings used the stars for navigation, and early calendars were based on the progression of the sun and the moon. And of course, our popular culture is filled with stories of extraterrestrials, UFOs, characters in a galaxy far, far away, and voyagers going boldly where no man has gone before. My childhood favorites were all the Twilight Zone episodes about visitors from space, and I loved the stories from Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles. Our curiosity as humans and our desire to explore the heavens, to know the unknown, fueled space exploration and the race to put a man on the moon. It's even brought together people from more than a dozen countries who are now part of the International Space Station. This, to me, exemplifies our enduring shared humanity, that no matter how much money we have, what we look like, or where we were born, we all awaken to the same sun and end our days under the same moon and stars. And while I've obviously never been to space, so I don't know this for a fact, I imagine that from way up there, the Earth's continents have no borders. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome my guest who has been to space. NASA astronaut John Daniel Olivas has flown missions on the Space Shuttle Atlantis and the Space Shuttle Discovery. He was the first person of Mexican-American heritage to walk in space. He's the author of a children's book, Endeavor's Long Journey, and he and his wife created the Space for All Foundation, which I can't wait to hear more about. This is the NILC Freedom to Thrive podcast, powering pro-immigrant narratives, one story at a time. I'm Victoria Ballesteros, Executive Vice President of Narrative at the National Immigration Law Center. Hi, Danny. How are you?
Hey, Victoria. How are you doing today? Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Likewise. Thank you so much for making time in your busy, busy schedule traveling the world. Well, I have so many questions about space that I want to ask you, but before we get to that, I would really love to just start out asking you about your early life and your upbringing and what was that like and how did that influence your journey?
Sure. Well, let's see. So I was actually born in North Hollywood, California. My
Oh,
parents
nice.
at the time lived in Van Nuys. I'm from the Valley. Uh, I guess native born SoCal. But my family, most of them are from the El Paso, Texas area. So right on the border between Mexico and the United States there in West Texas. So we moved there when I was around 4 years old. So relatively
Okay.
young age, moved
Okay.
back to West Texas and, just grew up as a West Texas kid. One of the beautiful things about being that far out in West Texas at the time, there wasn't a whole lot of light pollution. And so being able to look up and these, beautiful clear stars at night, the elevation in El Paso is about 6,000 feet. And I'm sorry, about 4,000 feet. And you just could see forever. And I remember as a kid, my dad bought me a little telescope and, crawling up on top of the house at night. For some reason, I thought that would get me closer to the stars and looking through the telescope. And even with my dad up there, maybe it was just kind of a special time to spend time with my father.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I just really kind of grew up just being fascinated by the stars, looking out into the heavens, looking at the moon. I'm, as you can probably tell, a little bit older. So I consider myself to be a child of the Apollo era. The
Yeah.
Apollo missions were going on when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
And that was a big inspiration to me, seeing all of what we were doing, going to the moon, and just remember watching the launches and the recoveries on television as a kid. And then I guess it was around age 7 or so that I remember going to Houston, Texas on a family vacation and just really being blown away by all the cool things that there were to do in Houston, including they took us to the Johnson Space Center, which is the center for the human spaceflight program at NASA.
Yeah.
And, for me, that was just a big inspirational moment that I think changed my life. That I think it was at that time that I really realized that I wanted to be part of space, wanted to be part of the space program, because I realized that this is something that human beings were doing.
Yeah.
And I wanted, to participate.
Yeah. What beautiful experiences, and what a time to be alive. Okay, so from an early age, you were fascinated with space, and you maybe there were some seeds planted there for wanting to be an astronaut. What was it like? What was the process like for you? At some point, you made a decision that you wanted to pursue this. What was that like? How does one go about becoming an astronaut?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if there's a magical answer that anyone could follow. It's not like a
Yeah.
cookbook recipe.
Okay.
As a kid growing up, I was mechanically inclined, and I remember like my father, who I looked up to tremendously while he was
Yeah.
alive, um, was a big inspiration for me. And he was an engineer from the School of Hard Knocks. He worked a lot of labor jobs, but there was never a problem or a project he was unwilling to tackle. I remember him telling me that there's nothing that one man could put together that he couldn't tear apart and put it back together again
Yeah.
himself. It was a simpler time when you didn't have computers.
Yeah.
But he used to take me for all of his little repairs that he would do, everything from washing machines to refrigerators to cars to whatever. So I grew up being a gearhead. My 1969 Ford F100 pickup, I still own today. That's the one I had in
Oh,
high
nice.
school. I've got some really special things that I'm doing to it in the future, but I'm
That's
working on
great.
that right now. But that was kind of my inspiration to become a mechanical engineer. And I always had this seed in the back of my mind that I wanted to be part of the space program. At the time, there weren't people who necessarily looked like me in space. And I guess I never really saw myself as being an astronaut as much as a person who could enable space exploration. The way I look at it is, I may not be able to be an astronaut, but they're going to need someone who fixed the rocket, and that's what I could
Yeah.
do. I could fix spacecraft, and that's when I decided to get my degree in mechanical engineering from UT El Paso. And before I even graduated in 1988, I submitted my first application to become an astronaut, knowing full well that I wasn't going to be qualified because they had
Yeah.
minimum requirements there, and I didn't meet them. But I wanted NASA to know that this was the job that I wanted to pursue, and it was kind of maybe a commitment to myself that was something I was going to pursue. So over the years, I continued to apply, and over that same duration, I continued to improve my background and my academics, my understanding of the world around us and areas that I cared about. Went back to school, got my master's degree in mechanical engineering, and then ultimately my PhD from Rice University in mechanical engineering material science. Continue to apply, continue to apply, continue to apply. And so 9 years after my first application went in, it was finally accepted, and I came in for an interview. And so literally a decade from my first application, and in 1998, I became a U.S. astronaut, part of Class 17, Group 17, and we were called the Penguins. And that began my journey becoming an astronaut.
Why were you called the Penguins?
The group before us, let's see, there were 25 U.S. astronauts selected from between 3,000 to 5,000 applications that year, which was actually a pretty big class. But the class before was even bigger. They were a total of 44 U.S. astronauts that had been selected, none of which at the time that I began working for NASA or that we began working for NASA, none of which had actually flown in space yet. And so the tradition is that the class prior names the class that comes in.
Oh,
They were called the
okay.
bugs. I know they were called the
Okay.
sardines because there were so many of them. Like all their classes, they were all scrunched together. And they said, "Oh, you guys are never going to fly. You guys are like flightless birds. You guys are penguins."
Oh,
And
I
so
love that.
we became called the Penguins, and it stuck. But eventually, we flew, and it all worked out great. It's a lot of really cool NASA traditions that I was able to participate in. So yeah, that's how Penguin came about.
Oh, I love that. The fun and the joy that's part of being an astronaut. And what is your dad's name? Is it okay if I ask? Because I want to honor him and his influence that he had on your journey.
Yeah, Juan Olivas Jr.
Juan Olivas Jr. That's beautiful. I just wanted to honor him for the influence that he had on you because you have achieved so much, including what I've just learned that you were a penguin who actually flew. So how many trips have you made to space?
I had two flights in
Okay.
2007 and 2009. I was a member of the STS-117 crew in 2007. My job was I was a spacewalker. So for that mission, I had two spacewalks. The first one was to set out a set of solar arrays on the International Space Station. We had some problems with our space shuttle as we were going uphill, and we had some damage to the thermal protection system. So my second spacewalk, they actually asked me to go out there and fix it. So I
Oh,
went out there and
nice.
actually repaired the space shuttle, and we were able to come home. My second space mission was in 2009, STS-128, and that was a logistics flight, getting the space station ready for like long-term space exposure because we were getting ready to retire the space shuttle program. So we're trying to get everything up there that we could. It was three spacewalks, and I was really it was a very needed mission because I was actually the first one. I was basically kind of the lackey. I was the person who was a rookie on the flight, didn't really know anything, but I think I'd done well enough on that flight that when I flew the second mission, they made me in charge of the spacewalk. So I was EV1 on STS-128, and I got a lot of sense of pride with that because we had three very successful spacewalks. Nobody got hurt. We completed all of our mission objectives, and the spacewalks went off without a hitch.
I have so many questions. Okay, so that's where you wear the big puffy spacesuit,
Yeah.
and you're right, and you're walking. So when you're walking in space, what are you walking on? Is it like, are you just walking on nothingness? Like what? I mean, what do you walk on when
So,
you're walking in space?
spacewalk is a little bit of a misnomer. It's
Okay,
probably best considered as a space crawl.
okay.
Remember when you were a kid, you would go into like the jungle gym, and you have
Oh
all these
yeah.
bars around you, and you would kind
Hmm.
of like move from one to the other and kind of
Yeah.
move around inside this jungle gym. Um, it's kind of like that on the space
Okay.
station. You have all these handrails around there, and you move yourself around with your hands. You don't really use your legs. The only time you use your legs is if you're going to secure yourself into a foot restraint, and that's normally because you're getting ready to react a bunch of loads, and want to be able to send the loads into your feet to give you a little bit more leverage. But for the most part, working on space stations pretty easy because it's all just the upper body strength that you really rely on, and you don't really use your legs a whole lot. That's going to be a bit different when we go to the moon. If we go to the moon, it's going to be like going out on a hike. You're going to have a
Okay.
big heavy backpack. You're going to go out there, collect rocks, and that time you will be using your legs and pretty much most of your body muscles. Although it won't be as bad because it's 1/6 gravitational force on the
Yeah.
moon, so
Yeah.
you won't feel as heavy. But yeah,
Okay.
so they just generically refer to being out in space in that puffy suit as a spacewalk or an
Okay.
EVA.
Okay. Okay. I was picturing you walking on something, but I wasn't sure what you were walking on. Okay. Thank you. For those of us, the vast majority of us humans who have never been to space and likely will never be in space, how would you describe that? Like, is it even possible for you to describe what it's like to be up there for those who will never experience it?
Boy, you know, I think being exposed to that kind of environment, certainly from a standpoint of being selected to be an astronaut, you're representing your country.
Yeah.
You've worked really hard. The people who become astronauts, we're not billionaires. We're not anybody special. We're just people who love space and work really, really hard and remain determined. Um, and when you're in that environment, you know that you're only there because of what everyone else has done to get you there. And I know I felt an overwhelming sense of wanting to be able to take space and put it into a bottle and bring it back just so I could expose, my friends, my family, people
Yeah.
to just a small taste of what space is like.
Yeah.
And the best that I could do was, you know, uh, I have some stories that I bring back, and I talk to my friends and family about, tell them a little bit about the experience. It can never do it justice,
Yeah.
but I'm here to say is that it's a very overwhelming experience. It's a humbling experience, but it's also a
Yeah.
very inspirational experience
Yeah.
that you get. On the space station, it's an island in space that we built. We put it up in 1998. We've had it populated by human beings since the year 2000. It's been there as part of our history for many children now. That's all they've ever known is a world with a space station, where it's like,
Yeah.
I knew a world where we were trying to get to the moon.
Hmm.
Um, but it's satisfying to know that we can do these wonderful things as engineers and scientists. But then when you consider that accomplishment against like the backdrop of the universe and how much is left to explore and what is out there, it pales in comparison. So again, it's humbling because you realize that significant as we are as human beings, against the backdrop of the universe, we're pretty insignificant, not even a grain of sand on the beach of all that there is to know.
Yeah.
But it's also inspirational because that means that
Yeah.
look at the opportunity out there to learn, look at the opportunity out there to explore. And that's what I find
Yeah.
exciting about space.
Yeah. I feel inspired just hearing you talk about it. And I feel like probably we maybe me overuse the word awesome, but it sounds like an awesome experience. Like you would just be in awe while being up there. So you mentioned earlier on that when you were much younger and thinking about this space and space program, you didn't see a lot of people like yourself up, up in space or working as an astronaut. You are the first person of Mexican American heritage to walk in space. What does that mean to you?
So I've struggled with this over the years because I've only ever seen myself as Danny. And the
Yeah.
people who know me have only ever seen me as Danny. And I feel like the accomplishments I've accomplished in my life have been because of what I've put into it and less about, the color of my skin or my
Yeah.
ethnicity. Um, but I also understand that it's important for those of us who come from these diverse backgrounds to be present in a way that the next generation can see that these are attainable goals for all of us, and it is through hard work and determination gets us there, not the color of our skin, but that the color of our skin or our ethnicity should not be the barrier which prevents us from attaining these goals and objectives.
Right.
Um, I think as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate um, that it's important that we remain in a in a fashion where we can be seen and where we are present and we are vocal, because there are elements that are out there that do see the color of my skin, who do look at my ethnicity, and will ascribe that to being the reason why I've obtained whatever I've obtained. I mean, I
Yeah.
look at myself and I know in my heart I'm really good at what I do,
Yeah.
um, and it's up to me every single day to go out and just continue to prove that to myself and prove that to the world around me, and not worry so much about what people think about how I got to where I got to, because I know the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you've certainly proven that many times over. And your great grandfather was an immigrant to
Yeah,
Texas, correct? Can you talk about your great
yeah,
grandfather and his story?
yeah. So Valente Olivas, he immigrated to the United States. I think the census shows around 1894 or so. He was about 14
Okay.
years old. I didn't see any other relatives with him at that time, so I think he came maybe by himself,
Wow. At
crossed
14.
over, yeah, into El
Wow.
Paso, and ultimately he found work as a laborer. He worked at the local smelter in El Paso, Texas, so a copper smelter. And I've got some photographs of him in his older years where he's in front of his bicycle that he used to get to and from the different
Yeah.
locations at what ultimately became a Sarco in El Paso. Um, and it's kind of fitting that years later his great grandson ends up becoming a material scientist,
Yeah.
graduating from Rice University. Certainly brings it full circle. And I think when I think about the risk that he took to come
Hmm.
here
Hmm.
and establish himself and ultimately his family, um, none of what I've experienced would have ever been possible had it not been for the sacrifices and the risks that he took. But by the same token, I feel like my contributions to this country were tied to that immigration of my grandfather coming here to allow me to, generations later, be able to contribute back to this society, being able to contribute back to this country. So I'm really proud of my heritage. I'm really proud of where I've come from, and I'm proud of where we're going.
And what do you think Valente would say or think? What do you think he would think or say about his great grandson traveling to space?
Oh boy. When myself, my sister, and my brother are like the first generation of offspring to have gone and gotten their college degrees.
Yeah.
My mother, actually, Carmen Sandoval, she was a source of inspiration to me because while I was in middle school, she went back to school, back to UTEP, and ended up getting her degree in education. So I got an opportunity to sit in the front row of her educational experience. And my parents knew the value of higher education. Yeah. But in the previous generations, that same exposure and experience just wasn't there. My father used to tell me stories about how his grandmother, my great grandmother, used to relay to him that they would look up at the stars at night, and she tried to convince my father that the stars were hung in a black box by God. Wow. And that's why you kind of see him kind of swinging back and forth. Yeah. I think anyone from that time, whether it be my grandfather or anyone else, would just be really impressed with where society has come today and what we've been able to accomplish. And I think it's what we owe to the past generations, is to continue this wonderful American story, going forward and continuing to improve our society. So I think he'd be really proud.
I think so too. And okay, so let's talk about the Space for Everyone Foundation. Tell me about the foundation, why it was created. I think you and your family, you and your wife created this foundation. What is it, and what are you hoping to achieve?
Well, we created the Space for Everyone Foundation back during the last administration. We were horrified with what we were seeing that was going on at the southern border. The separation of children from their families at the border, to us, was not who we believe we needed to be as Americans. And we welcome immigrants to the United States. There's a path for legal immigration, and we strongly encourage that. And we were seeing a lot of the hatred that was being sowed at that time, especially around people who look like me, who have my background, rapists, murderers, drug dealers, etc. And I actually, being from El Paso, Texas, a lot of folks remember that there was a crazy guy from North Texas who, on his own accord, went down to El Paso, Texas, to a Walmart and committed a mass murder. That Walmart was the Walmart by Chula Vista Mall. I grew up about a mile away from there, and this was my backyard. This is my home. I used to go there, as when I go to El Paso to just go get groceries, or it's like this was like my people. In fact, my wife's best friend, who she grew up with, her mother was among those who were killed that day in that Walmart. So we felt like we needed to do what we could within our means to try to rectify the misunderstanding that was out there regarding immigration in the United States coming from the South, especially of those people who are, Hispanic and Central American heritage. And so we started Space for Everyone Foundation. It's a family foundation, and we're supporting the various causes associated with legal immigration into the United States, especially with regard to those organizations which are family oriented, to keep the children with the families and support the families, through this experience, I've been able to expose my children to what it was like growing up on the border, growing up in El Paso, Texas, understanding the community that was there, that was binational, and the fact that we did live in harmony. And we, of course, you always have things that come up, right? But the lion's share of our interactions with our brothers and sisters across the border was very familial. In fact, many family members live on both sides of the border.
Yeah.
We spent the time to try to understand what was going on with family separation. We sat in on several court hearings of some. It's really just heartbreaking to see a child who's like 3 or 4 years old sitting in court with a representative there not being able to understand English, and the judge basically talking to them as if they're a fully fledged, understanding adult who is aware of the decisions that are being made for them. And so that's why it was important to us that we wanted to make sure that, again, I represent the United States. When I took the oath to become a NASA astronaut, I swore to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, which means the laws. I'm a law-abiding citizen. And so we are as a family, and we want to do what we can to, within the laws and the structures that are within place, to make sure that immigration is dealt with in a legal, fair, and just manner, in a humane manner, to really represent the embodiment of caring that is America, and that who most of Americans are. And we want to do what we could and anything we can.
Yeah, and you mentioned family separation, and you mentioned legal pathways for individuals seeking freedom, or for whatever reasons coming to this country, and the families that were being separated and the children being separated from the parents that you're talking about were seeking asylum, and asylum is actually a legal pathway. So it's not. I just felt the need to say that, because there are a lot of people who look at what they see and hear on the news every day about an invasion and all of the horrible things, and some of which you referenced, and there may not be an understanding that the families approaching and entering this country are seeking asylum, and that is a actual legal pathway, a legal right. Speaking of the border, and you grew up at the border, you've spent a lot of time at the border. I wonder if, when you're up in space and you're looking down at the Earth, what do you see? What do you see? You don't. I imagine you don't see borders. You're looking down. You see this big Earth. What do you see when you're up there?
Right. Well, I think the tagline for the Space for Everyone Foundation is that I'd say the only borders that are visible from space are those where you have the boundaries between land and sea. You see blue, then you see browns and greens that marry one another. But for the most part, the things that you don't observe are the things that ultimately cause a lot of consternation here on Earth, and that is the construct of human minds of what a border is. We have, I'm not sure how we got to this point, but it is the way it is, right? And so these borders that exist in the minds of ourselves, the ones that we fight over, the ones that we kill one another over, and have all sorts of consternation over, spend billions and billions of dollars each year to fortify and protect. And from the universal perspective, are non-existent. There are things that we as bipeds on this planet, as a human species, have chosen to create. And so that aspect of the border or borders tends to get us focusing more on the things that separate us and make us different, rather than the things that make us the same. And because we're all one species on this planet, the 99.9 some odd percent of what we care about as individuals are cared for by everyone across the planet. It's that very small percentage that ultimately becomes the differences. And this is what causes human beings to do horrible things to one another. And I think from a celestial perspective, looking down at the planet, you asked a question earlier about what you would want to bring back, what I would want to
Yeah.
bring back. I think it's that perspective, that overview effect, to recognize that we are one species on this one planet, and we're out in the middle of a vast ocean of nothingness, which is the universe.
Yeah.
And as numerous as the planets are, as numerous as the stars are, our next door neighbors are lifetimes away from us being able to visit. Assuming we even know where to start looking. It's just us.
Yeah.
And if we could just focus on the things that we have in common and find a way to get along, what a wonderful planet we would have. Because think about what we've been able to create by, for example, the International Space Station.
Yeah.
16 countries across our globe speaking different languages, different cultures from different parts of the world, different financial mechanisms, different ways of doing engineering, different everything, right? But yet we found a way to get along, and we did something phenomenal with the ISS.
Yeah.
And think about what else we could do if the whole globe were energized in that same way.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to geek out now, if that's okay, because I have these burning questions that I'm having a hard time containing. And the most burning one that I have that I've been wanting to ask is about life, other forms of life, space aliens, if you will. We've all seen the movies and the shows of the little green man. And are we alone in the universe? Are there other life forms in space? It could be just your opinion. It doesn't have to be a factual declaration, but I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think statistically, if you look at the numbers, as James Webb Telescope continues to learn more about the universe that we live in, we take everything that we've ever learned and we pretty much put it, turn it on its head. I think at one time I used to use an old number, which I'm sure it's very antiquated now. It's 400 trillion stars out there. And if you assume that the 400 trillion stars have an average number of planets around it, just like the one star that we're familiar with, the sun, if you have, depending on how you count, 8 or 9 planets, right? One of which is inhabitable. And you start doing the math on that, you realize that the likelihood of life being out there is incredible. But I'll share with you a story real quick.
Okay.
On STS-117, we're on our way back, coming home from the space station, and we had a 1-day wave off which basically means we're trying to land at Kennedy Space Center, and the weather was really, really bad. So
Okay.
they said, "Hey, take a half day off, do whatever you guys want to do, and we'll try to come home tomorrow." We're like, "Great." So me and Jim Riley, JR, who was my EV1, my boss, my spacewalking boss, we said, "Hey, let's go stargaze." Because I told you about West Texas and being able to see the stars at night, right?
Yeah.
So we went on the flight deck of the space shuttle. Everybody else is in the mid deck. We turned off all the computers really, really low, so there was no stray light inside the cockpit. And we were just looking out, at the stars at night. Now, you're going around the planet, basically you have a sunrise or a sunset every 45 minutes.
Oh my
So
gosh.
you get lots of opportunity to have nighttime passes at
Wow.
night. I mean, you got to remember, you're going 17,500 miles an hour. That's
Oh
pretty
my gosh.
fast around the world. Yeah.
Okay.
And so as we're looking out of the rear window of the space shuttle, I see what looks like 2 clouds in space. I'm like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. There's no atmosphere up here. How can you possibly have clouds in space? So I reached down and I grabbed some binoculars, and what I'm looking at is something that we don't experience here in the Northern Hemisphere, which is referred to as the Magellanic Clouds. The Magellanic Clouds are 2 irregular shaped galaxies that were formed about the same time as the Milky Way. They're our next door neighbors. They're about the same time that we formed, but they're like 150,000 light years away. And so as I'm, peering into the large Magellanic Cloud, it dawns on me. It's like, I wonder if, like, right now, someone's looking at me, looking at them.
Oh my gosh.
And I remembered about the distance of time.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if they're looking at me right now, they're not going to see me for 150,000 years.
Oh my gosh.
And it puts things into perspective. Is that not only we're talking about the sheer numbers, but also, we as human beings have lived in this universe just a small sliver of time, which is the other dimension that we're very familiar with.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why you couldn't have had life, whether it's the dinosaurs or wherever, it's like at some other point in time in that timeline of the universe or sometime in the future. And it's pretty exciting to think about that.
Yeah, I think you just broke my brain, by the way, but just trying to process all of that. But it's so fascinating, and I'm taking that as a yes. So my crazy imagination will continue to uh, come up with stories about what's out there. How do you sleep in space? Do you
Very
sleep in
blissful.
space? Like very
I
blissfully, really?
never had a problem sleeping in space. When you close your eyes in space, I had a sensation like I was falling,
Oh, wow.
which can be unsettling.
Yeah.
But I thought it was kind of neat because,
Hmm.
you don't get an opportunity to feel like you're falling continuously really ever here on planet Earth.
Yeah.
But when you close your eyes, like astronauts, they sleep in a sleep restraint. So it keeps them in keeps them from floating away. You don't want to be
Yeah.
floating around the cabin, while you're
Yeah.
sleeping. So you put the sleep restraints on, which is kind of like a little bit like a sleeping bag. It's got hooks
Yeah.
or Velcro on it, and you attach yourself to a wall someplace. You can sleep anywhere you want to. You can sleep, on the ground. You can sleep on the floor. I mean, the floor, the ceiling, the walls, upside down, right side up, diagonally. It doesn't matter. You can sleep anywhere you want to. Um, what's really comfortable though is that when you're in your little sleep restraint, you're not going to float away.
Yeah.
Is that if you some astronauts have a hard time sleeping with a sensation like they're falling, so they'll
Yeah.
take bungee cords and they'll secure them to a wall to give them a sensation like they're leaning up against something.
Hmm.
But it's more mental than anything else. Same
Yeah.
thing with a pillow. You feel
Yeah.
like you want to have your head on a pillow, otherwise it feels like you're constantly straining your neck.
Yeah.
So they have this basically a foam pad that they just put on the back of your head and you Velcro it to your head and makes you feel like you're sleeping on a pillow, but you're not. You just have your
Yeah.
head on,
Yeah.
a piece of foam attached to your head. But I found the experience of sleeping in space just phenomenal. I think the biggest treat for me about sleeping in space is that you experience what's called eye flashes. And these are the heavy particles that are that are part of the space radiation.
Hmm.
They're zinging around in space, and they're just small stray neutrons and protons. Occasionally, one will hit your optic nerve, and when you're asleep, it experiences like what's called an eye flash. And for me, they were streaks of light that would go from the left to the right, green to blue. That's what I remember.
Yeah.
And it wakes you up.
Oh,
And then
wow.
you open up your eyes and you see that everything's dark. And you're like, wow, those were some eye flashes.
Yeah.
And you kind of get treated to this celestial fireworks show as you sleep, which is,
Oh my gosh.
it's a little disturbing because it does wake you up, but it's also kind
Yeah.
of fun because you never experience that down here because the
Yeah.
atmosphere protects us from that radiation.
Oh, that's amazing. And what do you eat? What was your favorite thing to eat? Do you eat the dried food? Is that not a thing? Do you eat actual
Yeah,
food?
so they work really hard at nutrition in NASA, but they just I don't think they're ever going to have a good solution for space food. What I enjoyed doing, so I guess, the Mexican in me just kind of came out because in the space shuttle, we used to fly tortillas, right? And
Oh,
why
nice.
tortillas? Well, because bread is very voluminous
Yeah.
and it gets dry very, very quickly in space. Tortillas, they found, actually can stay moist longer and they can stay fresher longer. And we had
Yeah.
an area that they had a cold plate on the space shuttle by an avionics bay that you could stick the tortillas in there. So we didn't have a freezer or refrigerator, but we had an area that was kind of cold and we could put the tortillas in there. Um, I think they actually got the tortillas. I think they got them out of El Paso or maybe San Antonio, someplace in Texas.
Okay.
And so, I invariably what I would end up doing is I'd make myself, burritos, tacos. So I'd
Oh
take,
my God.
maybe some sausage and maybe rehydrate some eggs, throw some Tabasco sauce in there, or maybe take, some potatoes or chicken, or try to make some fajitas, or
Oh my
just try
gosh.
to be a little bit creative because after a while the food eventually starts
Yeah.
to all taste the same. So
Yeah.
you try to kind of
Yeah.
keep things spicy and flavorful.
That's awesome. Who would have thought that you're eating tacos in space? That's beautiful. Tacos are everywhere. So I love it.
Well, it's really
And
fun. So on STS 128, I flew with my buddy Jose Hernandez. So
yeah.
he's also Mexican American, first generation immigrant. His story is absolutely wonderful. You ever get an opportunity to hear about that? He's got an Amazon movie out. I'll do a little plug for him. but we were both on 128 together, and it was we had a great time making breakfast for the crew downstairs at the galley, making breakfast tacos, getting everybody ready for the day. Just a lot of
Nice.
fun. I enjoy cooking. I love to cook. So
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so the tortillas, were they corn or flour?
flour,
Oh,
flour.
okay.
That corn
Nice.
gets too dry too quickly.
So you were eating good up there. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so you and I are not that, I don't think we're that far apart in age. Did you ever by chance watch The Twilight Zone when you were growing up?
Oh, we still watch it today.
Oh my God,
Every
I love
every
it, right? The
every
marathon?
yeah, every time the marathons come on, absolutely. Oh, I love the Twilight Zone.
Best show ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, there were so many just fun episodes about space and the cookbook, the one with the famous "It's a cookbook." Anyway, I wanted to geek out and ask you if you were also a Twilight Zone fan, because I think that also it's just, again, just the imagining of what's out there and what it might be like to engage with other life forms from space is just fun. So what was one thing that you experienced in space that you weren't expecting, good or bad? I'm sure there were many things, but or
The
not,
one
because
thing that I wasn't expecting. Well, I would say for my first flight, the entire flight,
yeah.
obviously as a
Oh, I
rookie, you
bet.
never seen any
Yeah.
of it before. You
Yeah.
try to prepare yourself for it. I think, we were talking earlier about the STS-117 flight, and you had mentioned about like it was good to have all those engineers who are working on the solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think what I experienced in that flight, I think has been something that's really stuck with me today. And it's something that I believe in my heart. And I think it actually kind of ties into the conversation regarding immigration as well, is that the solution for that flight didn't come from an engineer.
Oh.
It actually came from a person who has no engineering background at all, but he has a background in medicine. What happened was, as I told you, this Apollo 16 or Apollo 13 type moment where you had all the tools on the table. They were trying to figure out how they were going to repair the space shuttle. This was on the ground. We were busy doing our work up there. And there was one guy at the kind of the corner of the room, a guy by the name of Jim Locke, who was a flight surgeon. And as the engineers are trying to, struggling, trying to figure out what they could do, he raised his hand and says, could you use a stapler? And they turned to him and said, "What are you talking about? We don't have staplers up, on this, in the EVA toolkits."
Yeah.
And he says, "Well, you have a stapler in the medical kit."
Oh.
And so you remember those, if you've ever seen, if you have like a laceration in your head, they have these little metal staples that you can kind of
Yeah.
cinch this thing up so that you
Yeah.
don't, basically like a suture as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
sewing it. And so they pulled it out and they tried it and they created ultimately the repair that was called up to me that I used on Atlantis.
Yeah.
But I think that moment, that's why I said to me that kind of really spells what I love about space exploration, especially within NASA, is that it's the willingness to of inclusion of diverse thought,
Yeah.
right? Someone who doesn't necessarily have the expertise and the background could actually have a solution, right? If you're willing to listen to them, if you're
Right.
willing to be open to that. And
Mm-hmm.
this idea of inclusion of diverse thought to me carries over into kind of us here in America.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I feel like I was successful, obviously I had a great crew that was supporting me during the repair. Could not have done that without them. But also, I had a specific background in an area of material science and mechanical engineering. So, and I had a lot of familiarity with thermal protection system, material systems. So I kind of knew what I was getting into before I even went out the door because I touched them when I was on the ground. But just because I was a rookie didn't necessarily mean that I wasn't like one who was qualified to be able to do this repair.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I love about NASA, and I think it's a take-home message for all of us, is that sometimes we have to be willing to challenge our perceptions or our preconceived notions of who people are and what they can actually contribute, and listen to them and
Yeah.
explore how we can best utilize the people around us to come up with some very creative solutions and ultimately get everybody what they want at the end, which is
Yeah.
success, right?
Yeah.
And that to me is like the one thing that really resonated with me through all my NASA experience is that and it carries over into my life. And I feel like that's emblematic of what we as a society have to gain from immigration, is being able to take people who can do these wonderful things. They have to be willing to be given a chance, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
we'll continue the American story.
What a beautiful note for us to end this conversation, because I know that I have taken way more of your time, and thank you for letting me. Thank you for letting me geek out a little bit too. And you have a beautiful story, beautiful family history and family story, and an inspiring story. And I'm so honored to have had this conversation with you. And I want to thank you for the work that you do, continue to do, on behalf of immigrants and keeping families together. I just really, really appreciate you as a person and your story and your contributions. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I couldn't end without acknowledging the significance of how inspirational my wife has been towards helping make all this a reality. Not only did she support me while I was, trying to become an astronaut, she has
Yeah.
been, we have fought these battles shoulder to shoulder. We have 5 kids in our family, so children are very important to us.
Yeah.
I think I draw on her strength and her inspiration to keep the fire lit under me to continue doing what I can do in whatever
Yeah.
form I have to be
Yeah.
able to continue the message that is truly one of our family, and that, you know what, there is space for everyone.
There is. There is. And what is your wife's name?
Her name is Marie Schwarzkopf Olivas.
Marie. Thank you, Marie, as well. I want to thank our listeners for spending time with us. For more immigration truths, visit us at NILC.org and freedomtothrive.com. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you.